okay? And then probably one of the most widely used formats you will find yourself using Pandas with is JSON, right? JSON is everywhere. In most instances, it's rarely the case that you'll be working with CSV files, but what you will find yourself doing is you're extracting information from some API endpoint or something, right? And then you're analyzing that information. The obvious thing for people to do is you would say, I'm going to get the output from the API endpoint, if it's in maybe XML or something, or JSON, and then convert it into CSV. But that's time consuming, right? What you'd much rather do is you take advantage of the pandas.readJSON function. Quite useful. I gave an example of Lusaka Times, right? If you look at the structure, of a JSON file spooled from the Lusaka Times API endpoint. So there's an endpoint that allows you to extract posts. The idea behind this is simple, by the way, for those that may not be familiar with this. So that example is getting the information that you see when you go here. Now this Lusaka Times has been, I think, in existence for probably almost a decade, if not more, right? So they have a lot of posts. Now think of a situation where you're wanting to analyze the things from here, right? What you do, we said, is you can take advantage of the fact that WordPress, because this thing is powered by WordPress, WordPress has a RESTful API. It allows you to extract information in JSON format. Now, if you look at the structure of this, right, a single post has a lot of information associated with it. So if you are analyzing information coming from this API endpoint, you'd have to figure out a very smart way of programmatically pulling this information. I know you'd say, well, I can easily implement a function that just loops through this and checks for these. It checks for these. This is a dictionary. You can view this as a dictionary. It checks for these values here, right? I'm looking at what the ID is. But it turns out that in Pandas, what you can do is you just take advantage of the read JSON function, and it does everything for you in the background. And what I did actually in the example, if you remember, is I said, there's a caveat, by the way, you run into errors if you try and read this direct from the URL, right? You'd have to play around with this somehow. So what would be probably easier for you to do is you probably want to get this. You just want to extract this, put it into an external JSON file or something, and then you'd read this thing here, right? It's a JSON file. So what we said we do is, again, what we do is we just import Python pandas. Notice I'm doing a number of imports because these files are located in different places, is it? Import your Python pandas, and you create a variable that's going to hold this. But in this particular case, we're using the read JSON. And all you do is you feed it the JSON file, and the magic happens, right? So this thing has ingested the JSON file on my behalf. It's figured out the pattern associated with the different, attributes, right? Associated with the JSON file itself. So if I check, if I use the built-in function len, for instance, this thing is going to tell me how many records I have. So it's about 100 posts from Lusaka Times. And it turns out by default, when you're using this RESTful API, well, by default, actually, it spits out five posts, if not 10 posts or something. But you can pass it other parameters so that you pick. Like in this particular case, I'm picking 100. If I wanted to harvest everything that has been published by Lusaka Times here, I would have to start picking 100 posts per page, right? So page 100, page 200, until I get to the very end where there are no more posts to read, right? And I do my analysis or something. But in this particular case, I'm putting 100, I check the len, I also check the type, right? And I see that the read JSON, or read by JSON function, converts this thing into a pandas data frame. And because it's a pandas data frame, we can do the same things we've been doing with the read by CSV, right? Like we can check what sort of columns we have here. Yeah? We can check the shape. Everything is the same in life, is it? 100 observations, 29 columns. right? And then you can start doing your analysis. Now, it's not my job here to tell you how to analyze the data. It's the job of the person for whom you are maybe building this solution for, right? They say, we want you to, for years now, I've been telling some of the students when I use this as an example, you can build a very nice application that, a mobile application that harvests information not just from Lusaka Times, but from the Zambian Watchdog blog, right? It runs WordPress. From Web1 to it runs WordPress. In fact, you can even use Graph API, Facebook's Graph API, to pull these things from Facebook. And you build this really nice application that enables somebody like me to just use an Android application to gain access to the most recent news items per day, right? Rather than me going to all of these different things here, something like that. Anyways, what else can we do here? We can do the usual. We can inspect the information. You notice inspecting the information is the same, but in some instances, depending on the structure of the data that you're working with, functions like head, for instance, will not really be useful in any way, right? I mean, look at the output here. You'll be sitting there and you're wondering, what is this, right? But maybe what may be helpful for you is just to look at one record and perhaps transpose it again, right? And then there we go, you have some useful information. In this way, you actually be able to figure out smarter ways of analyzing this information. Yes? No. So I've done a couple of things here, right? You notice? Thank you. Questions will normally give us an idea of whether people are following or not. And I think my method is working here. But notice what we're doing, right? We first of all import pandas. After we import pandas, what we are doing is we are creating a variable, Lusaka Times. So var Lusaka Times is a variable that's holding this data structure. And this data structure is nothing more than the data that we are reading from the JSON file. Yeah. Is it legal? Well, so this is interesting because, and in fact, it's one of the reasons why we are going to have a discussion centered around ethics, is it? If you've noticed the course outline. The question you should be asking yourself is, you know that these LLMs we're using, if you ask it questions about people in Zambia, it pulls information from places like Lusaka Times, right? You should be asking yourself a question, did they get permission from Lusaka Times or something to do this? So my response to you is, this is a publicly available information. The API is open to the public. It's different from Facebook. You know that for you to get access to information on Facebook via Graph API, you have got to apply to gain access to that, right? You register your application and all those things. But this is publicly available information. So I would argue that it's actually legal. Unless if these guys had an explicit copyright statement on their website. But it's hardly the case on most websites in Zambia, actually. You rarely find people explicitly indicate that we're using a Creative Commons license or something. So I'll say, yes, it's legal. Nobody would actually sue you, right? This is publicly available information. Now, in case of Facebook here, because we are learning, if I was to use an example of the Facebook Graph API, I wouldn't really use Graph API, but I'll take advantage of a slew of Python packages. I don't know if some of you guys have used these packages that will actually scrape information from Facebook. So if you are scraping information from, let's say, the Zambian Watchdog page, you can do that because the page is open to the public. And because it's open to the public, you don't necessarily have to log in for you to access that information. You understand? And because you don't necessarily have to log in for you to access that information, you can actually scrape it. But you wouldn't necessarily be able to easily extract that information using Graph API. You know? You know what I'm trying to say here? Is this making sense? Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so JSON, right? Easy enough.